Harkey for being here. I understand there may be some other members joining us in a little while. Let me introduce our group. My name is Tom Umberg. I'm chair of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. And with me is Mr. Roelof van Ark, who is, I think you know, is the CEO of the California High-Speed Rail Authority, and Mr. Jim Hartnett, former mayor of Redwood City and relatively new commissioner who's spent a lot of time on one particular aspect, and that's the blended approach, particularly in the peninsula. So, as you may know, we have released today an initial draft of the California High-Speed Rail Program, the business plan. We'll have 60 days before it becomes final, and during that period of time, we welcome input from all sources. We've attempted to take input in putting together a new plan that's different than what we've seen in the past. What I'm going to do is I'll talk about a few of the tenets of the plan, what we focused upon. Be happy to respond to your questions, any comments that you may have. I'll turn it over to, first I'll turn it over to Mr. Hartnett to talk about the blended approach, and then to Mr. Van Ark. This is a different plan. This is a different approach. What we've done is we've reevaluated and drilled down on the ridership numbers. The two most important components, at least from my personal perspective, are ridership and the cost. And in terms of ridership, we've had our ridership numbers that we will continue to improve upon, reviewed by peer review panels from literally around the world. We've used numbers for ridership in three different categories: high, medium, and low. And the numbers we've used to estimate projected revenues, rather than using the high numbers, we've used the medium numbers. We've also taken a look at the capital and operating costs and been conservative in how we figured capital and operating costs. Let me just give an example of how we've been conservative. Rather than use the inflation rate that exists today, somewhere less than 1%, over the course of the project, which will extend out a couple of decades, we've used a 3% inflation rate. We've also re-examined the revenue projections. We've re-examined the revenue projections to make sure that we can meet the commitment, it's actually the law, that says that the high-speed rail system, in terms of operations and maintenance, once it's operational, may not operate with a taxpayer subsidy. And that's true of every high-speed rail system in the world. Every high-speed rail system, every true high-speed rail system in the world operates at a profit. We're also, based upon comments and issues raised in various communities, we're also looking at new ways to build on the infrastructure that already exists, and thus the blended approach I mentioned a moment ago, so that we can maximize the infrastructure that's in place, that we can get something operational as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, so that Californians can benefit from the system as soon as possible. We've also broken it down into segments. As you may know, the first construction segment will be in the Central Valley, approximately 130 miles in the Central Valley. And then after that 130 miles is underway, we have a decision to make, and that's a decision as to whether we extend to the south or we extend to the north as the first operational segment. The first operational segment is the segment which there will actually be riders. Once we become operational, we will be covering our operational and maintenance costs. Taxpayers, as I mentioned a moment ago, won't be subsidizing those operational and maintenance costs. That's one of our challenges. One of our challenges is getting to a major population center as soon as we can. We project we'll be either to the north in the Bay Area or to the south in the LA Basin by the year 2021. And depending upon which way we go, the costs in year of expenditure dollars are $33 billion to the south and $31 billion to the north. We've looked at our federal, state financing components. For the next 3 years, we will not require any additional federal or state financing. We have approximately $6 billion to construct that initial 120 to 140 miles in the Central Valley. And we've also taken another view as to when we think private capital will be invested in the project. And we've done that, again, with a view toward looking to other projects around the world, in the United States. The private sector is very much interested in this project. They recognize the same things that we do, that it can be operated at a profit. But the question for policymakers is, at what point in time do you bring in the private sector, and what is the trade-off in terms of them assuming risk, and what do they pay us for, and how do we maximize the public benefit? So for policymakers, there are really three options as to what we do in California concerning our transportation infrastructure. The first option is to plod along like we're doing right now, and that's always the easiest option. It's the easiest option because it generates relatively little criticism. You may get some disgruntled citizens from time to time, but it's really just moving, trying to do whatever you can as our infrastructure starts to crumble and implode. That's the easiest choice. The next choice is a choice of building the necessary freeways and airport capacity to accommodate the population of California, which by the year 2040 will be about 50 million people. That's conservatively about 50 million people. So when you've got 50 million people, you'll need to build 2,300 additional freeway miles. You'll need to add 115 gates at airport terminals, and you'll need to add 4 additional runways. Now, query, where can you do that? Is it possible to do that at John Wayne Airport? Is it possible to do that at Lindbergh Field? Is it possible to do that at SFO at LAX? I would suggest it's probably not possible, even if you had the money to do it. But the money to do that would be over $170 billion to be able to build that kind of infrastructure out. Or there's a third option. That third option is the high-speed rail, the visionary option, the option to transform California in terms of its transportation infrastructure and build a high-speed rail system. Having said that, let me turn it over to. Why don't we first go to Mr. Hartnett, and then we'll go to Mr. Van Ort. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The blended approach that has been discussed previously is a new feature of the business plan. The business plan had been previously talked about as dealing with phases, but the blended approach is quite a different wrinkle than phasing of the project as I characterize it. The blended approach ultimately allows, without a full build-out of the system completely from north to south, a one-seat ride from Los Angeles to San Francisco by first accomplishing what's called the Beta Basin, which is the San Fernando Valley to San Jose, and then utilizing a blended approach north and south from there so that you have an ability for someone to get on a train in Los Angeles and traverse to San Francisco without changing trains. And the blended system allows a number of important features. One, it helps direct investment to the local and regional transit agencies for them to improve the utility of their systems for the communities they already serve, while at the same time having those improvements have utility for supporting the high-speed rail system, at least to the extent of the blended approach. It requires enhancement of some of the infrastructure, but fundamentally what it means is you can accomplish a one-seat ride from Los Angeles to San Francisco at a lesser cost than if you built out the full originally anticipated phase in terms of an entire standalone separate high-speed rail infrastructure. You can do so consistently with the character of the communities in the urban and suburban areas that it serves. And you can do it in a way that enhances the local and regional transit utility for those communities as well. It is something that has been looked at very closely. It's still being looked at with our transit, regional and local and metropolitan transit partners to make it real, to make it happen. And as part of that, there's been a renewed effort at approaching funding with a common voice in California for the the local and regional transit agencies to support their needs consistent with supporting the ultimate high-speed rail blended system, both in the north and the south. And that can be done in the near term as well as the long term, meaning that we can work together, not waiting for 10 years from now for there to be a new segment, for example, from San Jose to San Francisco, or a new segment from San Fernando Valley to Los Angeles. The investment in the local infrastructure can happen well before then, consistent with the local community needs and consistent with the anticipated needs of high-speed rail. The blended system, north and south, can support the anticipated capacity needs for high-speed rail for many, many years to come. It could be 20 years, it could be 30 years, it could be that the blended system will be sufficient in and of itself to support the capacity needs of high-speed rail as well as the capacity needs of the local and regional transit agencies, which could provide then a quicker platform to get into phase 2, which would be Sacramento and San Diego. So it's a dramatic departure. It reflects the agency and the board, the authority and the board having listened, having worked closely with its current and potential partners. And it's still a work in progress in that while the plan, I think, is very well thought out, it's real, it's realistic, it sets forth a real path going forward, the authority and board will continue to listen to the communities and the local and regional transit partners in order to make it even better. And I think that's an important aspect of where we are. So we're looking forward to a robust period of conversation that is starting with the release of the draft business plan. And we feel that we've set an honest and transparent plan going forward, that the business plan itself provides a basis for policy decisions that the legislature and the governor can make. We believe that the figures that are provided in all aspects are reasonable. Where we're talking about costs, where we estimated conservatively in the sense that we estimated on the higher side. When we talked about revenues, we estimated conservatively, meaning we estimated on the low side. And we tried to be clear and objective and produce a product that could be reasonably relied on for policy decisions. But we're still open. We're in a listening mode. So that would be my basic summary.
Thank you, Mr. Hartnett. Mr. CEO?
Senator.
I would like to give an update because clearly our team, been the one that's been putting the business plan together for the last week. It was a big task, but as I have told some of you before in hearings, that when we come forward with the business plan, can you hear me? No.
Hear me? Yeah. Okay. When we decided to come up with a business plan, I had told you and others that we were going to put the realistic and correct figures on the table. This is not a matter of trying to hide anything. I had offered transparency from day one, and that's exactly what we've done. We have worked to be realistic, as you've heard a lot of words about being conservative. We have not tried to be over-optimistic, if that's a word I could use. And I really do believe that we've tried to be transparent. Most of the work that we have done in consultation with international partners. You know, we have many international partners that we have cooperation agreements with, and also using identical or similar international experiences and having cross-checks and peer reviews of the international groups. Furthermore, on the ridership side, you know, the peer review, and I may be repeating a bit, but I did implement the ridership peer review group, which was, I call it international because it did have European, Canadian, and American people on it, but ridership experts. I believe we went through many and all, in my opinion, the criticisms that were received from the market and from various very esteemed institutions in the United States. And we had the models checked, the assumptions checked. We had a lot done, and we were able to determine what is a robust ridership modeling outcome based, as the chairman has already said, on bands. That means there's certain sensitivity, maximums, minimums, and means on all the figures that we use. These type of projects in the world, by the way, whether it be the costing of the project, whether it be the ridership of these type of projects, basically you cannot put just one figure to it. There's always bands of costs and bands of ridership and bands of results. And you will see in the business plan that we show you all of that as well, because we are as transparent as as you had asked us to be. We have, as has been mentioned to you before, a big difference between the past, and I don't blame my colleagues of the past, is that previous business plans have been more generic in nature, because at the time there was not yet the possibility to define a start to the project. But we are now much further down the line. We know a lot more about the alignment. We know a lot more about where we stand today, and we know where we want to start building the system. That means we could and have defined in one of the chapters, and it goes throughout the business plan, the phased implementation. That means this building block approach, building phases of the project and getting those phases up and giving them a utility, a usable utility, and decisions have to be made at the end of each one of these phases or during these phases whether we want to build the next phase or not. So that is clearly a difference to the more generic business plan that was done in the past. And again, I can't blame them because it was very early in the day for them to have come up with something else. The other aspect that board member Hartnett has already explained is the blended system. Although we had originally called it also a phase type of approach, we are very happy with the approach, calling it the blended approach, and we're very happy with legislators that have really put this on their agenda as well, because they put the focus on this blended approach in high-speed rail. It is not uncommon. There are many systems in the world where the high-speed rail backbone or spine is built, and in the city areas where you travel at much lower, reduced speeds, sharing track or sharing infrastructure with regional transportation systems is not uncommon. It's done in many other parts of the world. All the kind of highly rated high-speed rail systems generally use that approach. So for us, bringing that into the business plan, I think is the right thing. It clearly saves money, although our top-end costs incorporate a fully built-out system. There are many reduced costs in the business plan, which will include these blended end systems. They do not result in a reduced functionality of high-speed rail, but they allow for a certain 20, 30, 40-year capacity of the system. And you must not forget that these rail systems are built with a lifespan of 100 years, 100 years plus, because the infrastructure of a rail system basically stays there forever. So having done this business plan in the last 6 or 7 months, we were obviously very excited at the time that the governor finally appointed some further board members, his own board appointees. Not that we didn't get the support of the board members like Mr. Hartnett and Mr. Umberg that are here today, but the 2 new board members were given the specific task of getting very involved in ensuring certain aspects of this business, the plausibility of this, a sanity check on this particular business plan. And I think it is about nearly 2 months now, Mr. Richard, Mr. Dan Richard just joined us, one of the two appointees of the governor, that these two gentlemen have been involved in revising and reviewing, let's call it that, reviewing and to some extent revising, but our plan. And it's been a tough 2 months, tough because these people came on board demanding a lot of answers, the answers that people like yourselves are also due. But I think it's the right time now with Dan Richard being here for him to give the interpretation of what he saw, what he then was informed about, and how he sees the project as it stands today and how he sees the business plan as it stands today. So with that, Dan, I would like to hand over to you, or through you, Mr. Chair.
Before we hand it over to Mr. Richard,
I think it's this one.
I think we're going. You all can hear me in the back, right? There we go. Yes, we were very enthused that Governor Brown appointed two people to spend an enormous amount of time, probably more than they ever envisioned, digging into the ridership figures, the financing figures, the funding figures, the other assumptions that went into this new business plan so that we could create a plan that it was conservative in the sense that we estimated the numbers to be at the high point as opposed to having to come back and say, well, we need to readjust upward. If there's a readjustment, my guess would be that ultimately I know that this is hard to believe in government, that we readjust downward because of the assumptions that we made in the plan. Dan came to us with 12 years experience on the BART board and extensive experience in government policy making as well as in the private sector. And Mike Rossi was vice chair of Bank of America and had a career in being very diligent and conservative with respect to one's money. So, and I beg your apology, I'm going to have to leave, but I'm going to leave you in very capable hands here with Mr. Richard and Mr. Hartnett and Mr. Van Ark. So, thank you.
Well, we will miss your presence, but we thank you for your introduction.
Well, they'll give you better answers, so I don't know about that.
I'll have some questions. Thank you.
Is this on?
I think now it's on. Okay. Thank you, Chairman Umberg. Have a safe flight back. Assembly members, I'm Dan Richard. Thank you very much. I apologize for being a few minutes late. It's been a rather hectic day, as you could imagine, trying to address all these issues. Mr. Van Ark suggested that Mr. Rossi and myself, Mike Rossi and I, had come into this process with a lot of questions, and I think we brought the same questions to the High-Speed Rail Authority that most people who had been outside the process, regular citizens, would have had. Let me just touch on a few of these because I think we want to get to your questions and comments. But first of all, I was on the BART board for 12 years. And when I was on BART, it's an urban rail system. And it is funded with a combination of ridership revenues and then local sales taxes. So my experience in the transit system was that even though we thought we were very efficient, we got about 62% of our costs covered by our riders at the fare box. And that's very, very good in American urban transit systems. I was quite proud of that, but it's not 100%. And so the bond measure, of course, said that there can be no operating subsidy for high-speed rail. So literally, I think within the first 15 minutes when I met Mr. Van Ark, I turned to him and I said, well, my question is, can this thing even work? Because my experience is such that it always requires some level of public subsidy. And what I learned from Roelof and also from Mike Rossi, who has lived in many places around the world, lived in Tokyo, worked with the financing the Japan rail system and other things, is that, in fact, high-speed rail is different. It has a different business model, primarily because it competes against airline fares. And we see a massive mode shift in Europe and other places when a high-speed rail line goes in, and there's a big shift off of airline travel. And what I now believe to be the case is what's been told to me, that every one of these high-speed rail systems around the world generates enough money to pay its operating cost. I know this has been a source of public dialogue, but every single one does. Now, they don't generate enough to pay their capital cost back. but they do generate enough to pay their operating cost. And indeed, they generate enough revenue to pay for future investment investments in the leg, in additional legs of the system. And we fully anticipate this will be the situation here in California. Now, Mr. Van Ark was talking about the ridership models. Mike Rossi has spent a career in finance for reasons that I can't comprehend, becoming an expert in financial and other types of modeling. And he can talk the language of modelers in a way that I could never hope to. What he did was he came in and he sat down and realizing that the ridership model is at the heart of this, that fundamentally if you don't have ridership, you don't have revenue, which means you can't cover your costs, really dove deeply into the ridership numbers. And of course, everyone here knows that the former ridership projections were the subject to very intense criticism from respected sources like the Institute of Transportation Studies at Berkeley and so forth. So we really wanted to get it right. Well, first of all, Mr. Van Ark is to be complimented because he stepped back from those earlier critiques and created a peer review group that included international experts, and he even reached out to some of the critics, like ITS, and they suggested people who would be appropriate for this peer review group. It was an independent peer review group. The names of the members are in your report. Mike Rossi has spent time talking with Dr. Frank Koppelman, who's the chair of that peer review group, with other members of it, talking with the people who run the model. And this is basically what he found as a result. Number one, the model is sound in terms of the way that it operates. Questions would be about the input assumptions that go into it. And in every case, as the model has been revised for this business plan, in every case we have picked the conservative assumptions. So for example, one of the biggest drivers of ridership and the ridership model is what the future population will be of California. The Department of Finance, as you know here in the Capitol, is very actively involved in an ongoing process of analyzing California population growth. And they have a series of estimates about population. Our ridership model uses basic population estimates that are below the lowest level forecast of the Department of Finance. So that's a big conservatism. Another big driver would be fuel costs. And there, we're assuming that gasoline prices will be fixed at $3.80 a gallon, where all of the metropolitan planning organizations are using $5 a gallon. Another input assumption is transportation mode. If people are mainly driving down the road for personal business, they're less likely to use high-speed rail than someone who would be driving from Fresno to San Francisco on a business trip. So we used very unfavorable mode splits, unfavorable to high-speed rail. So in every case, we tried to use the conservative numbers. Having done that, we have low, medium, and high forecast numbers for high-speed rail. But then Mike Rossi came in and said, well, I want to know what the break-even point is. I want to know where we would be against those forecasts and still be able to cover our operating costs. And he asked our consulting staff to do that break-even analysis, which they've done. What we believe is that once the initial operating segment is built, and that's when we first bring true high-speed rail to California, that that segment will produce sufficient ridership to create a fairly significant amount of revenue. In fact, if we build that initial operating segment from Merced to the San Fernando Valley, the numbers, I think, and I'm looking at Kurt Ramey, are like $6 billion of NPV revenue for that leg. The break-even analysis shows that even if we were below our lowest forecast, which again is based on these conservative numbers, by the second or third year of operation, we could be like 15% below our lowest numbers and still break even. So by the time you add up the conservatism of the inputs, the use of certain ranges of models, and then the break-even analysis, we just feel very, very comfortable that the ridership numbers are sound. And that means that we will be in a position to generate revenue for each of the legs that we build out. So that's a very important conversation to have with the legislature and with the people of California, because the vote said that there could be no operating subsidy with the use of the Prop 1A bond money, and we feel very confident about that. Yes, Assemblywoman.
Rather than have this just be a dialogue go
I'm
one
so
way,
sorry.
No, not at all. I've been listening up until now, but I do have some questions on the
Yes, ma'am.
ridership. I have here, if I'm looking right at at section 6, page 17, that is the ridership that you plan on having. It's Exhibit 616.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a medium ridership scenario at ticket price of 83% of airfare, and that's 35.8 million people for full phase 1.
Right.
And that's annually?
Right, but full phase 1, yes, that's right. The full phase 1, let's make sure that we're being clear. When we say phase 1, unfortunately it has two meanings. The common sense meaning is the first step that we would take. But phase 1 in this case
San
means,
Francisco to Los Angeles?
Yeah,
Is
to
that
Anaheim.
What you're
That's
talking
right.
about? Anaheim. Okay. How are you calculating that? Because I've not seen that. All I have is the numbers here. I don't have the background information, but I know that number's been questioned before. It's not that far off from where we were. We were saying before that we'd have 39 million people riding this, and in essence paying more than and traveling slower than they would to take an economy airfare. In 2010, Amtrak carried 29.1 million passengers for the entire year. How is California going to, between San Francisco and Los Angeles, move 35 million people a year?
Well,
How does that work?
first of all, you said 2001. I mean, this is a 2035 number. So in terms of apples to apples, we have to look at that. I'm a little bit at a loss because Mr. Rossi's the one who went through this. Roelof, I don't know if this is something you can address or if we'll need to supplement the information.
I'd just like to say that, you can't compare the Amtrak countrywide ridership figures with the high-speed rail ridership figures. I mean, Amtrak is in many, many corridors in the country. They're operating under, a system that is not necessarily attracting riders because it's not really offering a competitive alternative to any other mode of transportation. It's a very slow system, as you know, in most parts of the country. The only place where you can compare Amtrak is in the Northeast Corridor. And in the Northeast Corridor, the Amtrak, the Acela system in the Northeast Corridor basically is running at capacity. Basically is running at about 170% of the operations and maintenance cost. That means it's got a 70% over coverage on or profit on its operations and maintenance costs. So, we can't compare.
Well, Acela, I believe, is subsidized by Amtrak, are they not?
No, Acela is not. It's the opposite way around, that Acela makes a profit. And the profit out of Acela is used to subsidize all the other loss-making lines around the country. And the Amtrak as a whole is subsidized. You're correct about that. But the actual Acela service on the Northeast Corridor is profitable and it's got a coverage of about 170% on its fare bar.
Well, things must have changed dramatically. The latest report that I have is a 2004 study that documented Acela's losses at about $51 million, but covered by an overall annual subsidy of nearly $1 billion by Amtrak. So I will submit my questions to you in writing, but I'm questioning that. I also I have a lot of other questions that I'm sure we could get to. One is, why are we starting in the Central Valley? Why does that have to be backbone and ground zero for this? Since there's a lot of opposition right now and we don't really have the money to complete an operating segment, we're doing a construction section that's going to be ripping up farmland and kind of destroying businesses?
Well, let me take that question, but the lawyer in me says I think the second part I would object to, because I mean we're in an environmental process right now. I don't know that we're going to be destroying businesses when we get done with the environmental process. We will see, but we have to be very sensitive how we go through any community, whether it's the Valley or any other community. And what Jim Hartnett has been working on in the peninsula is to talk about how we go through communities with the minimum of impact. And I believe that that's the way that we should approach all communities, no matter where we're building the system. But I'd like to address this issue, Assembly Member, because I came onto the authority as a skeptic of starting in the Valley. I had the same questions that other people did about why we would start in the Valley, and I've said several times in recent days that now I stand up and say that I believe that that's the right decision for a lot of reasons. We all know that the stimulus money application was geared towards the Valley, and so we'll just say that and put that behind us because that's there. But there are ample reasons to be starting in the Valley apart from the stimulus money. And really, one of the keys is this new blended approach that we've embraced. So the fact of the matter is that we have an opportunity to use existing right-of-way, existing corridors, and existing rail infrastructure on the San Francisco Peninsula and as we move into the Southland with Caltrain and Metrolink. So we know what corridors we're going to use there, and we know that we need to now work in partnership with those systems to develop long-term plans for blended service and beyond. The one place where there isn't that type of infrastructure that we can use, really, is in the Valley. So we have the opportunity to acquire right-of-way in the Valley that doesn't really exist right now as a usable segment for high-speed rail. And that right-of-way will have real value. I mean, it'll probably be $400 million worth of right-of-way value in the Central Valley. And if we don't do that now, it's one of the faster growing areas of the state, and so that will be just harder to acquire in the future. So that's point number one. Point number two is that ultimately the Valley is where the trains will run the fastest. At some point we'll be buying high-speed rail train sets, and we'll want them capable of the fastest speeds. So the notion that we would start, say, on the Peninsula Corridor or someplace else and have these trains and never know how we would run them at their highest speeds is really problematic. We get the most track per dollar in the Valley, and so that's another good reason to start there. And finally, again, it comes back to this blended approach that Jim Hartnett has worked on so diligently, and for which we give credit to your colleagues, Senator Simitian and Assemblymember Gordon, and also Congresswoman Eshoo. And that is that we now have a system that we're looking at that when we come out of the Valley, connecting either to the Southland area or to the Bay Area, we'll have other trains there waiting to connect. So people will be able to go from Merced to somewhere in the San Fernando Valley, do a cross-platform transfer onto one of the regional rail systems all the way into Union Station in LA or down to Anaheim. Or if we build the initial operating segment to the north from Bakersfield up to San Jose, cross-platform transfer onto Caltrain. So we're going to be working together now with these other agencies to be not only building our spinal segment in the Valley, but also improving their segments with advanced investments in those systems. And it's less of an either-or question than I think it's been in the past, because we're also trying to free up the resources to help them build up their systems at the end. So we'll be doing major construction in the Valley. We'll be working with them at the same time on the ends, and the idea will be that as we come out of the Valley to connect to one of our mega centers, that we'll be handshaking with those other systems.
Thank you. I think you made an incorrect, or maybe it was a correct statement, kind of a Freudian slip. You'll be doing major destruction in the Central Valley.
I don't think I said that.
Yeah, that's what you said, but that's okay. That's kind of the opinion that I have, and so I'm a little bit concerned that we at least be able to build a rail. I heard that there was going to be direct investment, direct local investment. Where is that direct local investment coming from? I know we have some bond funds set aside, but of the what, 975? I think your report says there's only 82 billion that have been lent to the local agencies.
That's right. My understanding, you're absolutely correct. The bond measure, Proposition 1A, provided $9 billion of funding to come through the California High-Speed Rail Authority, and an additional $950 million that was to be allocated by the California Transportation Commission for interconnectivity with high-speed rail. And only some small piece of that for positive train control has up till now been acceptably allocated. And it's my understanding, and I'm new to this, that two different administrations, the last one and this one, have both vetoed other attempts to allocate some of those dollars because there hasn't been good coordination between high-speed rail and CTC. We have reached out to the California Transportation Commission. Commission Chair Dario Fromer had intended to be with us today. He was fogged into Los Angeles. He didn't have a train to take to Northern California, so he had no way to get there. But he issued a statement that they're looking forward to working with us. So that 950, what's remaining of it, becomes one source of trying to move advanced investments into those systems. Another source would be, we're realistic, Assemblymember, about the unlikelihood of getting federal dollars in the near term, but we think that there are potential federal dollars for those systems. We will be working with those systems to try to help get money for them through that appropriations process. And finally, and I think that for people who are really looking for private sector involvement, this would be important. Some of those legs, and Mr. Hartnett can talk about this, Mike Scanlon from Caltrain said he agrees with this. Some of those legs actually are probably more ready for private investment now than we are, because they do have an established level of ridership. And I think there's a new dialogue that's coming about from some of the private capital sources about ways to come in and do public-private partnerships on those lines. So we've got the bond money that the public has already voted for. We've got the opportunity to work with them to lobby for federal money for those regional rail upgrades, and we've got the opportunity to work with the private sector as three ways to put an emphasis on those. And I don't know, Jim, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Well, I think in the Caltrain example, there are three partners to Caltrain. There's Santa Clara County VTA, San Mateo County Transportation Agency, and the Muni in San Francisco. And they, in their long-term planning for the corridor, have identified electrification as totally separate and apart from the needs of high-speed rail as an important part for the sustainability of that system. And so they have some resources that they've identified that support that, and that's synergistic with the high-speed rail needs, because the shared corridor, which is what it would need to be entirely electrified. And so that's important for Caltrain independently as well as it is for high-speed rail. So that's another example.
I think we're kind of a long way off, though, from having this connect to a shared corridor. If we've got $3 billion plus another 2-point-some billion, let's say about $6 billion to begin for 120 miles in the Central Valley. And I know that there are cities or counties that have a property tax, not a property tax, a sales tax increase for local transportation. Are you relying on that at all, the local transportation dollars, to fund?
No.
No. Okay. I'm still not clear as to why we're starting in the Central Valley. I know you did say that you can test drive, so to speak, the train, because it gives you a long stretch. I've had a chance to look through quite a bit of this, and I'm looking at the ridership is going to be a key component, the ridership and the price point. Also, the larger issue, though, I believe for the people of California and for this legislature and for this governor is going to be where you find the funding and how we repay it. Our debt. We're maxed out, and we're one of the lowest credit rating. I think New York might be one lower than us. Illinois is higher in the nation. And the last time we went out for a bond offering on high-speed rail, we don't offer on high-speed rail, excuse me. We offer general obligation bonds, of which a portion is carved out for a small portion for high-speed rail, but we're basically selling $1 to $2 billion increments for everything in the state and just barely getting bidders for that, even though we lower the price of our bond or lower the issuance of our bond and probably pay a little bit higher rate. So I think the overriding question to this whole project to me, you can debate the ridership with me, and I can probably come back with studies that will show that it's not realistic. You can debate that whether there's going to be a subsidy or not, and I can probably come back and show you studies that it's not realistic. But why are we starting something that we don't have any money to build? And I understand we've got a mission and a purpose, and I understand why the California High-Speed Rail Authority is doing it. That's their mission. That's what they're tasked with. But I don't understand why the state would be attempting to proceed with this now when other states have used similar monies, small amounts, and improved some of their existing infrastructure to maybe eventually, some point, sometime, do a high-speed rail. But to find survey medallions in the Central Valley right now, and still the EIRs aren't finished, I'm a little bit confused and a little bit alarmed that we are going down this path so fast, even though it's not fast to you. It is very fast compared to the money that we have. High-speed rail is not the only thing on the agenda. We're cutting schools. We're cutting services. We're planning on spending an additional 30% over the next few years for California health care, and we don't have any bonding capacity left. And the infrastructure bank idea, which would allow us to multiply that, doesn't seem to be becoming a reality because the government is broke at the federal level as well. Kind of thank goodness, but California is drowning in debt. And if I look at this, we're not only going to be drowning in debt, but we're going to continue to have operating deficits. This line will be subsidized. It's going to be an oops moment. It's going to be, we promised that we wouldn't have a subsidy, but what do we do now? We've got a section built here and a section built there, and I don't know how you're going to justify or assure that the ridership's there. I think when the people of California approved that bond, we were told that the ridership would pay for the cost. Now, the cost is not just to riders the operating cost. The cost was also, that the $9 billion would in essence cover it, and you will be held hostage for no more, taxpayers of California. But now this study shows $98 billion, and it shows 14 to 15 to 20 to 30 for segments or sections. And I think there's going to be a little sticker shock by the people of California. The more they learn, the less they like. And that shouldn't be with something that is so valued. I do believe that this will start anyway, because I think you're on a mission to begin. But I do hope that everybody just takes a little bit of a deep breath, including this governor. And if $6 billion is burning a hole in our pocket, then by all means, let's spend it somewhere, but let's do some good with it. Because right now, this is not the time to be starting this. And it's not just because we're in a downturn that almost every economist I know is projecting to go on very, very slow anemic growth for at least the next 10 years. It's because it's really a huge undertaking in a state that has on its own seen an extreme downturn just by its own actions and just accumulated a ton of debt, and we can't pay our bills, and we're losing working populations. So I appreciate what you're doing. I think you've been tasked with the impossible dream, and I'm hoping it doesn't turn into California's nightmare.
Well, Assemblymember, as a member of the legislature, you get the last word on this, at least for today. over the next 60 days. So we have a comment period. This is a draft document. We have reached out to people across the state, both supporters and critics or people who question high-speed rail, and we will continue to do that. I look forward to engaging with you and your colleagues on this. I believe that the numbers that we have here are sound, but I understand your concerns. And I'm personally just would say to you that I'm not on any kind of a mission except one to try to serve the people of the state. And if high-speed rail turns out to not make sense, you would not see me sitting up here saying that I believe it does. But I just would thank you and the members of the legislative staff for coming out today. Our organization will be open and available to you and to your staff and to your colleagues' staff to address any of these questions. And at the end of the day, we may end up with different points of view, but we will be brutally honest about what the choices are here and what the costs are as well as the benefits. And I hope that's the focus of our public debate. I believe that this report reflects everything we believe to be true, and then other people have other points of view, but we're not hiding the ball, and this is what we think will be. So it's nice to have the opportunity to meet you, and we look forward to engaging with you and your colleagues.
Thank you. No, you are truly not hiding the ball. I think this is, you've at least laid out the costs or the potential costs. They could be higher, but I do think you've laid out the costs. I think my problem is with the ridership and is with the potential of the cost versus who really wants to use it and who really will benefit from this. I do trust that rail works really well in highly developed areas where there's huge concentrations of population. I do question running it statewide. So thank you very much for your time. I do look forward to working with you. I will submit my questions, and let's hope that we can move forward for the good of the state of California.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.